Great. So as I mentioned, there's about 6 questions that I might ask. I'm going to try and constrain the time for you, but really it's around understanding how you started the business and some of your initial challenges, the funding that you went through and like that story, and then some tips on the sales process for entrepreneurs. So I'll kind of, just so you can kind of manage time. And yeah, just to kind of start with the questions, the first one is really like, how did you get started in your business? Like, where did the idea come from, and what got you to say, okay, I'm actually going to go, take action now versus it just being something I'm considering?
Yeah, sure. So, the original idea was born from living in China, in Beijing, actually. And I was confronted to kind of air pollution every day living out there. And so I studied history in Chinese. And then one of the things that came out was, why don't we recreate a historical event from the 1950s, recreated on social media. So on Twitter, and in Chinese Twitter, Weibo. And so we recreated the London Great Smog of 1952 over the space of 5 days. And it's when 12,000 people lost their lives. And so what we did is that we recreated this story through a first-person perspective and in very short tweets with all the visuals and kind of pictures that we came across. And so we built this kind of historical narrative. We launched it online, and then we saw that so many kind of media outlets and educators picked up on it. And so we thought, okay, here's an idea to recreate historical events through social media. And so obviously we moved to Europe, we got going in Europe, we got some pilot schools, we tested out this kind of recreating history through a very kind of timeline basis, like inspired from Twitter. And then what happened is that we kind of hit a block in that technology wasn't really being adopted so quickly in Europe as compared to the States. And so we moved in 2014 to Boston, and then that's kind of where we got the company started. And so very quickly we realized that we couldn't recreate historical events for the entire curriculum, but what we found by speaking to teachers and students is that they wanted to create their own stories and tell their own stories. So that's how the whole company was born from that, and we pivoted to allow anyone to create and share their own story.
Got it. Yeah, so it's really interesting that you discovered this through not actually pursuing it as an entrepreneur, but pursuing it more as like a project in China, and then you actually observed like a natural response to the product's enthusiasm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess this might be a loaded question, but I'm curious, what were some of like the key like barriers or difficulties that you felt like really, really early on when starting the business?
So yeah, obviously the toughest one was obviously, so being in Europe at that time, 2012, 2013, there was not much funding for education technology startups. Like, it was still extremely rare for entrepreneurs to go into that space because technology still hadn't really been spread. So there wasn't much kind of appetite for funding an idea like we had. So that was the biggest challenge, was how do we get enough capital to really build the kind of product that we wanted to? So we had a good MVP, but we obviously needed to commercialize it. And so that was the biggest barrier. And that's kind of why we moved to the States. But also, it wasn't also a golden ticket. It was also difficult to raise money in the States, obviously. But it was a lot easier than Europe at that time. So that gave us the kind of early stage capital to really build out the product and get more and more feedback. So that was the biggest challenge. Then secondly, obviously, like a lot of edtech products in that time was adopting the freemium model. Is obviously a real challenge for the majority of edtech companies, is finding a freemium model that works. Obviously, we went down the route of making everything free and then adding a paywall later, which allowed us to get kind of wide scale adoption, but it also meant that it was a challenge to then convert individual teachers into paying customers. So yeah, those are kind of the two challenges that spring to mind.
Yeah. So that's helpful. Is there anything else that you can think of that might just be like more modern challenges that maybe weren't quite as acute to you at the time, but if you were going to do this again, like funding might not be as big of an issue at this moment? So is there a concern that you might have if you were gonna rewind the tape and do it now?
Yeah, I think like if if we redid it now, I'd rethink the business model, obviously. We have a bottom-up approach, so we rely on teachers to kind of be the champions for Sutori and kind of convince their admins, but we've also realized that that's very limiting in the sense that it's difficult for a teacher to sell your product to an admin when budgets are relatively tight. And so I think we would have, if we had to redo it now, we'd probably focus more on getting admin buy-in and then kind of trickling down rather than entirely focused on the bottom up that we currently have.
Yeah, and so would that be an entirely different sales strategy? Because it'd be more like inside sales to administrators versus this more like B2C funnel that is driven by referrals and organic?
Yeah, I think so. So obviously, we still have a lot of inside sales now, but again, it's very hands off. So it's very much just the teachers kind of being the ones who have to guide that whole process. So I would have really rethought that kind of process from the start.
Excellent, thank you. You mentioned you came to the US to get the initial funding, and LearnLaunch is one of those programs. The specific question is like, how did you initially fund the company? So any like more specifics you could provide when you got to the US would be helpful.
Yeah, so like pre-US, we got a grant from the Belgian government to kind of get the prototype out. So that was roughly, $60,000, I think. And then we managed to raise in the US in total 465,000 US dollars. That was 100,000 from one venture capital, which was Intel Capital. And then the rest were from individual angels, as well as a LearnLaunch. And then, since then, we also managed to get a grant only last year during the pandemic from the European Union in order to kind of scale out the tech that we had. So that was, roughly around 100,000 US dollars, which, enabled us to kind of expand the platform. And, again, this funding is great now because it just didn't exist when we first started. So now there is a lot more options for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, would it be fair to say if you're a European company to really look within the country first for those grant opportunities because of the promotion of entrepreneurship, and then start to think more about like institutional forms of venture capital?
Yeah, I would still definitely be a big proponent of finding government grants at the local level and then looking for European grants. So there are a lot of programs now where the EU is funding a lot of money towards education technology. So there is ample space for that now. And then the last resort I would look, once you've got some sort of semblance of product market fit and a revenue model, is to then look for the venture capital funds. Again, Europe has quite a few now, but it's still very competitive because education VCs have a wide variety of choice, so they can easily say no to a lot of companies.
Interesting. Yeah. See if that holds true as the economy starts to take a hit.
Yeah, exactly. That's gonna be quite a shift now. So I think if we have this conversation in 6 months, I'd probably be like, oh no, it's not good.
And so the next question that we have is if there's any specific legislation, regulations, et cetera, that EdTech entrepreneurs should be aware of right now in this sector. And obviously GDPR would be one in EU, but just kind of anything else that you think are just like, those exogenous forces or considerations.
Yeah, I mean, we've just gone through a cycle where there is still funding. It's called the Horizon 2020 program. And, a lot of what the EU was doing was just to kind of, spearhead a lot of innovative technology projects. And so there's been a big push towards the fact that we had a pandemic and now we're realizing that we need tools which work remotely. So I think that's really key, is that this is shifting. And so it's shifting in the EU and it's shifting at the local level too. So I think entrepreneurs should really try and take advantage of that opportunity while it's still there. In terms of like legal aspects, I would say that, yeah, obviously there's each country's got their own kind of rules and regulations, although GDPR is it's used for all European countries, but like in terms of data privacy, it's similar to the States. Each state's got their own kind of privacy agreements now, so it's similar kind of model.
Interesting. So do you find that like localization is like a key challenge for you, or are you not trying to hit as many countries as possible?
No, it's definitely a challenge for European founders. So, we use some of our resources from the EU to translate the platform into Spanish. And obviously we have plans to translate it into all languages within the EU, just to help teacher adoption and students too. But that's definitely a challenge, which is why so many European founders are attracted by going to the US, because it's, one large market.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So this question, do you consider there to be a dominant or preferred like sales approach in the ed tech market? Like if you were going to advise a startup, would you like say, let's try and rally around like one or two models, or really around like the best fit model for them? Is there like, I as a consultant, I think about this a lot, because it's like your product doesn't matter if you can't sell it. So sometimes you're just looking for those like sell-through moments and then seeing like what product best kind of fits this need. So just kind of curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's really tough, this one, because each country's got their kind of own purchasing system. So one thing that I recommend edtech founders is to really focus on a market where you can easily get like approachable sales. And so for us, we focus a lot on international schools, which, it's not gigantic, but it's still, each country has some sort of international schools. And why we approach them is that they usually have funding to buy products like Sutori. And that means that we get smaller contracts, but we don't have to go through the process of being an approved vendor by the German state, federal state, and then go into each different German state and try and sell Sutori as a platform. And it has to go, huge sales cycles. So we choose an approach which is what's the most accessible way we can generate revenue from schools individually, rather than doing the kind of bigger state level. Having said that, there is a lot of success in some companies who just have, 2 or 3 big contracts with one country, different municipalities in that country or in that city. So that model also works, but from my own experience, I found it the most difficult to crack.
Yep. Got it. Thank you. So I have one more kind of formal question, then I'll ask like a summary one. So I think we're doing great on time. So this question was just like, what are the kind of main barriers that you encountered when selling into the European market? I mean, I think you've kind of touched on a couple of these, but if I could just like expand out the answer a little bit, it would be great.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few barriers. Obviously I highlighted in my answers. I think one of the biggest ones is like, it really depends on the product that you're selling. Like, are you a core curricular product, or are you extracurricular? And it's extremely important based on, what your grade level is and then what you're targeting. So, obviously, just from my experience with Sutori, we're very much extracurricular. Like, we allow teachers and students to create these interactive projects where teachers are the ones who control kind of the curriculum that's being worked on. And so that has a lot of advantages, but it also has disadvantages, meaning that a lot of schools and municipalities or regional levels, or the equivalent of districts, they won't necessarily buy something like that. Because it's not really solving a curricular problem that they're having. It's more of like a nice to have in that sense. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges if you're building an edtech tool, to make sure that you're really clear as to what you do and then how you augment teacher workflows if it's a tool like Sutori. If you're a curricular tool, I just think focusing on one specific grade level, like secondary school, one topic is obviously the best way forward by far. So that's like the biggest challenge is, figuring out kind of your products within each individual country is really the biggest challenge.
That really reinforces what I help startups with. But let me just double click on one point around the core curricular. What we see in the US is that like efficacy really matters. And so there's like really robust, RCT tests, but then there's also, anecdotal evidence. And I'm just wondering like what the role of evidence is in the EU and whether the exact evidence that you need varies state by state. Like in Germany, they're like, we don't care about your RCT test, but in another country, they're like, yeah, great. A couple testimonials is all we need. So just what the role is of evidence.
Yeah, so that's a really tough one. Again, it depends country by country. So some, again, why we target more international schools is that we can easily have a story that sells to them based on the international baccalaureate. And so we know that that works well. And so we repeat that kind of message. But if they're, if you're working in Germany, for example, it's extremely different to working in France. And so there's no like one unique standard. So what we've known that works well in the EU with other companies is just local testimonials. So having one, obviously, I mean, this, you work with companies all the time, but like having one great case study per country is really like the way forward that you can just replicate.
Great, thank you. And so just final question to summarize here is just like any other tips that you would share with a young, European ed tech founder who's just kind of getting into the game. You've hit on a bunch of tactical stuff, but just anything at a high level that you'd really like reinforce.
Yeah, I think just with early stage companies is to really figure out that problem you're solving and just really nail it down. So big thing that we do is obviously we still talk to customers, but just start talking to customers as soon as possible and really get that insight into what you're building without even having to build an actual full scale product that will take 6 months and have 56,000 features. What we've realized is that it's not about the features per se, it's more just the benefits for the teacher and the students, and really focusing on that, why they want to use, Sutori rather than another product. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs make mistakes in that, especially in edtech, where I notice a lot of, so many features are built which aren't even used. And, we fall to that as well. Like we've made a lot of mistakes on that. So that's my only advice. And the other thing is, don't try and please everyone in the European Union. Just maybe focus on one or two markets that you know extremely well, or you have some sort of insight, which gives you opportunities to grow.
Yeah, great advice. And I teach product market fit, so you're just hitting on all of my like key points. I'm like, talk to customers, focus on a small set of benefits instead of feature bloat. I mean, really, really resonates. So clearly that's been what's made you so successful, is being able to follow your principles. Great. So I got what I needed out of this, Thomas. So thank you so much. I mean, anything I can answer for you or anything I can do for you just in the long run, please do let me know. Because again, product market fit, K-12, and I'm always down to do mentoring calls and things like that. So I appreciate your time.
Nice. Yeah, thanks a lot, Colin. And obviously, if you need anything else, don't hesitate to send me an email or LinkedIn if you need any more information on what we do or any other stuff.
Great. Yeah, Jean mentioned she might share with me a few of your updates that would just help me understand the context a little bit more. I skipped through those questions because you're a busy guy and I can read about your product on my own. So assume it's okay to glance at some of those.
Yeah, of course. No worries. All right. Thanks, Colin. Have a good time. Good luck with the report.
All right. Cheers. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye.